Today is Jonah 1:17, 2 through 10. And the Lord appointed the great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out my distress, and he answered me out of the belly of Sheol. I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight, yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. At the roots of the mountains I went down to the land, whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought me up out of the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols, forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you what I have vowed. I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon the dry land. So ends the word of the Lord.
Thank you very much, Joan. And thank you very much, Zane. Not the way I would expect to start a service. I got to gather my emotions here. We got two unemotional guys crying in front of the church today. Not we're completely unemotional, but thank you for that. Your kind words mean the world to me, what you just shared there. It often is a bit of a thankless job, so the appreciation is immense. It's huge, so thank you for that. You're saying like he's been here 15 years and it's kind of one of the older in the area. It doesn't mean I'm old. I'm only 46, gonna be 47. That means I started pastoring here at 32. I was too young. I was too young at 32 to be doing what I was doing there. But that's my goal. I got 15 years in. My still hope is to do another 20. If God lets me do another 20, my goal is just try to be faithful. And I would say, like, the only reason I'm able to keep moving after 15 years is the grace of God, the work of God. Those of you who know me or know my story a bit, I probably would have crashed out like 7 or 8 years ago when I was having some pretty major anxiety, panic attack stuff happening. And for me, that was the grace of God to kind of reset me and get me to a point of less personal trust in myself and more trust in God, and less trying to put all the weight on myself of things, just trying to be faithful. And that sustained me the last 8 years or so. And I'm just going to try to keep clinging on to him and be faithful as we walk this life together and this church together. And so enough of that. Let's go to Jonah. So we're going to be in chapter 2 of Jonah. We're going to do the last verse of chapter 1. It's kind of a transition, could go both with what Zane was preaching last week and this week. Jonah, we've titled it the idea of God's compassion. What we see first and foremost and throughout this book is the compassion of God. It's mixed with the justice of God, right? You get those two things always at play with one another. This idea that God is fully just. He is angered by evil and sin. He does want to correct and change and punish that evil sin so it stops. But he's also compassionate, not wanting to punish, wanting to forgive instead. The culmination of those is we always go to Exodus 34, when God's self-disclosure to Moses is, I am merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, forgiving or keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity, transgressions, and sins, but then who will by no means clear the guilty. So you see both of those things. He starts off with merciful, gracious, slow to anger, this abounding in steadfast love. But then he's also, not willing to overlook evil, still going to punish evil. How is he fully both of those things? Is always the wrestle. The wrestle in the scriptures, the wrestle that we have with God sometimes, like, okay, I see the grace Jesus over here, but what about like the Old Testament angry God? How is he both of these things together? If you ever wrestle with trying to figure out how can God be both of those things, it's supposed to point you to the cross of Jesus Christ. The cross of Jesus Christ is where those two things fully come together, where God pours out his wrath on evil and sin, and he does so by pouring it out on his Son. And he is compassionate and gracious and forgiving by, through the sacrifice of the perfect Jesus, he can forgive our sins and give to us the very righteousness of Jesus. If you wrestle with how can he be both, the cross is the answer of how he can be both. And Jonah's wrestling with some of these same things. This idea that God is giving a message to Jonah, go and tell Nineveh that their sin is evil and the judgment of God is coming. That's the message that Jonah's supposed to go give. But Jonah knows in the back of his mind, his heart, he knows the scriptures, he knows Exodus 34. You'll see him quote it in chapter 4. He knows it. He knows God is compassionate and gracious and merciful and slow to anger. And he's going to forgive these people that Jonah does not want him to forgive. And we give Jonah a bad rap for not wanting him to forgive these people, but these people were evil. These people were destroying Jonah's people. I mean, the Assyrian army, or the Assyrian nation takes over 10 tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel. They enslave them. They capture them. This is like an enemy of Jonah's people. And Jonah's in the back of his mind saying, I know God's gracious, and I don't want him to be gracious to these people. And so there's this wrestle between just that justice, judgment of God and the compassion of God. And ultimately, we see at the end that God is compassionate, more compassionate than Jonah. And the question comes to us, if he's more compassionate than Jonah, is he more compassionate than us? Like, we should wrestle with that in these short 4 weeks that we're spending in Jonah. Is the compassion of God outweigh our compassion? And the answer is probably always yes, but the idea is like, should I then grow in compassion? Should I be compassionate to the people around me? Should I have a love for my city the way that God had a love for Nineveh? Should I love the people I come in contact with, even if they're treating me poorly or people that I love poorly? How do you work with all of these things? This is the story of Jonah. Zane, well said last week, kind of brought us through this story of this, the what is that word that you were saying oftentimes? It was the irony that's found often in the story of Jonah. This idea that this guy who was given a call by God to go speak against the evil of Nineveh, he decides, I'm going the other way. I'm not going to follow the commands of God. I'm going the absolute opposite direction. I'm going away from the will and plan of God. I'm going my own route. And he gets on a ship and he's sailing far away. God doesn't let him go. God pursues. God gets to the point where a storm is coming up. God creates a storm to stop Jonah in his tracks. And the sailors of that boat are freaking out, worried, praying to their false pagan gods, trying to figure out how do they get an answer to the situation they're in. And Jonah's asleep. And they go find Jonah who's asleep and they wake him up like, hey, pray to your God. Maybe your God will help us. And Jonah won't do anything. He's determined to be, against what God's called him to do. To the point where, the guys cast lots, which is a weird word, right? The idea of casting lots is throwing some bones and rocks into something and seeing how it turns out. Think of the idea of flipping a coin. Think of the idea of maybe throwing some dice and trying to see that's how you're deciphering the will of God. Not a great method, but it is used multiple times in the scriptures, and God has used it multiple times. Even you'll see it in Acts 2 when they're trying to pick the 12th disciple after Judas, betrays himself. The idea here, God uses that lot casting and makes it fall on Jonah so that the sailors know, plus they already knew because he said, I'm running from God. This is the problem. You're the reason. Pray to your God. He won't do it. He's stubborn. And they get to the point where Jonah's like, well, just throw me in the water. That's your only hope. Your only hope is to toss me overboard. And they're reluctant to do so. Reluctant to the point where they finally say, God, this is not on us. Please don't put it on our hands, not our blood, but we'll do it. And they throw him over the ship, and the sailors are saved. The sea calms down. And it ends with, verse 16, that they sacrificed and made vows to Yahweh. So the sailors are now worshiping Yahweh instead of their pagan gods, while Jonah is floating in the water. This is the end of our week last week. Jonah is just floating in the water. And then we see verse 17 here. Chapter 1, verse 17. It said, and the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah out there in the water by himself, floating on his own, and it says that the Lord God appointed The idea that God orchestrated, he had some kind of controlling aspect of appropriating this thing. He's moving the works of this environment to make this thing happen. And he makes a great fish swallow up Jonah, and Jonah's in the belly of this fish. This is where we lose a lot of people, right? Like, what is going on here? How is God talking to a fish? How is a fish recognizing the voice of God? How is a fish big enough to swallow a man? How can a man be in the belly of a fish for 3 days? He's going to die in the belly of a fish for 3 days. This is where we lose people. And people are like, it doesn't make any logical sense. The reality is, it doesn't make any logical sense, right? And there's interpretive changes that are problems that people overcome in some of this stuff. Some people get to the point of saying they believe Jonah, not just from the belly of the fish kind of stuff, but some other things. They believe Jonah to be more allegory, more parable than historical. I'm not going to fight that battle. If you are more on the idea of it's more allegory, more parable, I don't think that's a loss or a wrong thing if you believe that. The Bible's littered with parable. Jesus uses parable or story all the time. The idea, though, is if the reason why we can't believe it to be historical is because we can't see how a fish could swallow a person and be there for 3 days, well, that's not a good enough reason for me. Because what you have there, if this is historical, this is a miracle of God. God does miracles. If you don't believe in miracles, you will miss the vast majority of this book. That God is constantly doing miracles. And the reality is, if there is a God who is bigger and superior to the world that we have and us who are in it, and he's the one that made the whole thing, and he's the one that made us, of course he can jump in anytime he wants and do whatever he wants, however he wants. You could say, well, it can't naturally happen for a person to stay in it. Of course it can't naturally happen, but God can make it happen. How can he make it happen? The same way he made life happen for you. The same way that you could breathe for 9 months in your mom's womb before you came out, and then you actually needed to breathe air. I know there's actually scientific reasons why they're getting it from the mom and all that kind of stuff, but just still, the reality, get your brain past that and just see there's something miraculous there. Right? So even in here, God can do what God wants to do. God's beyond the natural. He is supernatural. And so he can jump in the supernatural and do it. But it's even beautiful how he does it. He doesn't just, there's some times where he does the completely extreme outside of the normal. But oftentimes he's using the normal natural things to do his supernatural thing. He's using a natural fish to do his supernatural thing. It's a crazy story. This guy's floating in the water by himself, ready to die. You'll see it here in a second. And this fish comes up, swallows him, and he's in the belly of the fish. And specifically, the wording that we see at the end of that is key. What does it say? He was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Anyone who's read the story the whole way through, it triggers something. He was in the belly for 3 days and 3 nights. 3 days and 3 nights. 3 days and it seems, is it catch? I mean, you guys got it. 3 days and 3 nights. This is without a doubt a foreshadowing of Jesus. One of the clearest, biggest foreshadowings of Jesus there is in the Old Testament. And Jesus will use this to describe himself. And we'll look at that here in just a bit. So keep a bit of a marker there. This story, specifically what we're seeing here in chapter 2, see Jesus in all of what we're talking about as we talk through Jonah. So Jonah was in the water. Now the fish is swallowing him up. He's 3 days in this fish, 3 days, 3 nights. What does he do? What do you do? What does one do when they're in a fish for 3 days and 3 nights? They pray, apparently. Jonah prayed to the Lord, his God, from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. So in there, verses 1 and 2, Jonah's sharing with us what he did for the 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of that fish. And it said he prayed to God. And specifically, the start of his prayers, he says 3 things 2 times to emphasize the aspect of what his prayer starts with. The start of his prayer is, I was in distress. And he says that I was in the belly of Sheol, the belly of the grave, the belly of the wasteland, the void, the underworld, the idea of the realm of the dead is what he's saying. I was in such distress, such need, such anxiety. I was in basically Sheol. I was in the grave. I was dead, as good as dead. This is as close to a near-death experience as you could possibly have. And Jonah says, I was in that moment where I was on the verge of death. And I called out. He says called out, and then he says again he cried. He's yelling for help. Help me, God. Help me. Have you ever been there? If you've lived, you've been there. If you've lived and you haven't been there, you will be there. Like, we will all have those moments or those seasons or those difficulties where life hits in such a way that you just feel like you're on the edge of death. You're in Sheol. You're at that complete anxiety and stress, and you need help. And Jonah just crawls out, God, help me, help me. I mean, multiple times in my life. The one that I was thinking about the most this last week as I was thinking through this was 12 years ago now. 12 years ago now that our son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 6 years old. You got a 6-year-old diagnosed at type 1 diabetes, and you don't know any of that. Like, you're a parent, you take him to the doctor. My wife took him to the doctor because he had some issues. The doctor did a test and said, go to Children's right away. The thing you don't want to hear. Go to Children's Hospital right away. And Steph's calling me. I'm trying to find my way down there. We're freaking out. And you find out that he has type 1 diabetes. And you're like, I don't have any idea what that is. And then you just start realizing that your life and his life has changed forever. And we had to give a 6-year-old a shot in the back of his arm every time he wanted to eat a meal. Like, try as a parent, I'm having to give a 6-year-old a shot in the back of his arm for him to eat. Like, life was different from that point forward. Like, we've all had those type of things where life hits in such a way that you just feel like, I'm drowning. I can't do this. I can't get through this thing. God, help me. Help me, is Jonah's cry. And he says twice here that God heard his voice and he answered me. As I'm studying this, like, I almost feel like Jonah's like a bit surprised as he's saying this. Like, look what I did. I ignored him. I went the other way. I was sleeping in the boat. I'm whatever. Like, Jonah got to a point where he finally just said, God, help me. And God heard me. He heard my voice. And he answered me. It's almost like a bit of shock. Almost like a bit of like, I can't believe he did. Jonah's, it's an interesting, I'm telling you a bit of a story of something that happened in our life that is not connected to anything that I've done or my wife's done or my son's done or any of those things. My answer for that, people would ask, we all ask those questions when bad things happen. Why do bad things happen? And you're trying to scour the scriptures for what is the reason for why this bad thing happened. The scriptures will give you multiple different reasons of why bad things happen. Sometimes it's sowing and reaping. It's our actions produced a certain result. Sometimes it's, Jesus is asked, is this guy born blind because of his sin or his parents' sin? Neither. But God's going to use this for his glory. There's multiple reasons that you'll find in the scriptures. And then ultimately you'll get to Romans 8 where it says that you are part of a broken world that doesn't work and operate the way it's designed to work. And someday the future glory isn't going to even be worth comparing to the suffering of a broken world. This is the answer Paul gives in Romans 8. No matter what the actual reason might be, Jonah's reason is clear. Jonah's rebelling against God and God's coming after him. You might seem like, well, that's a harsh thing for God to do. God's love is to pursue him. My scenario was not based off of any of our actions. But the reality is, even in a broken world, there's a sovereign God. Jonah's sitting here and he's, I think, a bit shocked that God hears his voice and answers him. So he's in the belly of the fish, praying to God, saying to him, in my desperation, I called out for you, and you heard me, and you answered me. Now, he's going to kind of go back and kind of retell the story in more of its dramatic form as we move forward. Verse 3, he says, for you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the sea, and the floods surrounded me, and all your waves and your billows passed over me. So he says here, so he's kind of looking back. He's now in the fish, praying that, like, God, I can't believe, like, you did it. I called, like, and then let's go back. You the one that threw me in there, is what he says. You cast me into the deep. You threw me in there, and now you're saving me. Question, though, did God throw Jonah into the sea? The sailors threw Jonah into the sea. kind of Jonah threw himself into the sea by telling the sailors to throw him into the sea. And ultimately, Jonah is saying, even though it was him, and even though it was the sailors, ultimately it was God. It was God's, what do we say? Was it his punishment? Was it his pursuit? I kind of think of the Romans chapter 1, like God gave them up, God gave them up. God's not giving up Jonah. He's pursuing Jonah, even though Jonah is running away. To the point where he's going to like ratchet up the difficulty of Jonah in this moment in order, he throws him into the heart of the deep is what he says. You cast me into the heart of the deep. Into the deep, into the heart of the sea. The heart of the sea is like the center, the core, or the depth of the sea. Debate. How far off was he offshore or whatever? Was the boat still there? Did the boat move away? Whatever. We can think about all those things. Jonah's impression is, I am out here alone. I am in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, completely alone. God, that's scary. All right? It's like one of my worst fears. The idea, there's something about me, I'm a little, maybe a panicky person in general, whatever. I don't like to fly. It's not normal for humans to be 30,000 feet in the air. I can look up at the air and see it and think, I shouldn't be up there. But the bottom of the ocean, that's super deep too, and I can't even see it. That's almost worse because you can't see what's underneath it. You ever been the middle of a big lake, you're out tubing or something, you fall off the tube and you're just there alone, and you're like, what's below me? What's down there? How far down is this thing? What animals are swimming around down there? What was that just touched my foot? You ever get that? Something touched it, and it's some big alligator, even though alligators aren't around here. Just something. What is it? It's freaky to know what's going on down below you. And you're think of Jonah out in the middle, by himself, no rescue, no boat, no life preserver, just out there treading water, trying to stay alive, out in the middle of this vastness, and there's nothing to help him. In the heart of the sea, the flood surrounded me. The surrounding has the idea of going in circle or turning about. So think of Jonah in circle, moving around I can't do too much of this myself, I'll get dizzy, but moving around and kind of just turning over as the water's turning. Think of a washing machine, what it does when you watch it for 5 seconds before you get dizzy and you can't watch it anymore, right? Just this swishing back and forth. Jonah's in this massive water, swishing back and forth, all this happening to him, and then he says, your waves and your billows were passing over me. It's like the surf and the waves were crashing over him. This is a legit scenario he's talking about, but just picture that in our scope of life. We felt this before, even if we haven't been out in the ocean. We felt like you're just trapped out there alone, there's nothing to help you. That you're just being turned this way and that way, and you can barely get your head above water, and the waves are crashing over you, and you're just trying to survive, is where Jonah's at. He says in verse 4, then I said, I am driven away from your sight. In this moment, as he's out in the middle by himself, he's treading water, trying to stay alive, he's being turned every different direction, the water's crashing over him, and he has this thought that God has abandoned me. God doesn't even see me anymore. He doesn't care about me. He has abandoned me. We've all felt that one too, haven't we? That, especially when you're in this moment. When you're in that moment and you're wondering, he's alone. He feels alone. Now, remember the connection point earlier, that Jonah was in the belly of this fish for 3 days and 3 nights. I know someone else who felt abandoned. Someone else who said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Someone else who's gone through something so horrible and feels completely alone. Like you're out in the middle of the water by yourself, the waves are crashing over, just trying to think about Jesus in the crucifixion. Jesus in the whipping with the cat of nine tails. Jesus as the crowd is jeering at him, wanting his murder and his death. And Jesus hanging on a cross saying, my God, my Father, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why am I here all alone going through all of this horrible stuff? Where are you? This is what Jonah feels. He's not the first one to feel this. Jonah's words here are ripped out of the Psalms and Lamentations. If you go through and just kind of try to cross-reference everything Jonah's saying here, he is using Psalms over and over and over again, like 6 or 7 times in this. He's ripping off Psalms. And he rips off Lamentations 3. I mean, let me share a couple of them here. Psalm 18, verse 4, it says, the cords of death encompass me. We'll see that one here in a minute. The torrents of destruction assail me. The cords of Sheol entangle me, and the snares of death confront me. In my distress, I called upon the Lord. To my God, I cried for help. From his temple, he heard my voice, and my cry reached his ear. Lamentations 3:53, they flung me alive into the pit. They cast stones on me. Water closed over my head. I said, I am lost. I called upon your name, O Lord, from the depths of the pit. You heard my plea. Do not close your ear to my cry for help. Psalm 69:1, save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there is no foothold. I have come into the deep waters, and the flood sweeps over me. Psalm 69. Jonah is like hanging on by a thread. The water, he's out there completely alone, feeling completely abandoned. The water turning him every which direction, crashing over his head, and he's thinking David-type Psalms. This is the beauty of reading the Psalms on a more regular basis. Read through Lamentations, even though it's sad and depressing. Like, read through those things, because they give words to what you might feel like sometimes. We're not a great people of lament. We want to celebrate. We don't want to actually understand that life has sorrows connected to it and what it looks like to lament and call out to God and say, where are you in this moment? I need you. It feels like I'm dying here. Where are you at? Like, God's a big enough God for you to pray that kind of prayer to him. David's done it. Jonah's doing it. Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? You're going to have those moments where it's just saying, God, I need you. Where are you at? It feels like everything's crushing in around me. So it says Jonah gets to this point where he feels completely alone in that first part of verse 4, that he's driven away from the sight of God. And then he says in the second half of verse 4, Yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. So this is kind of a bit of a weird one, depending on how you interpret this. Is this the idea that Jonah has a bit of hope that someday he's gonna overcome this and still live, and someday he'll get back to Jerusalem and he'll see the temple of God again? I think it's more, you'll see this reference of looking upon the holy temple as kind of the idea of facing God's presence in your prayer. And you'll see it multiple times throughout the Old Testament, this idea of praying towards the holy temple. The idea that God's presence, we know where God is at. We know where he lives. We know where he dwells. This is Old Testament language, right? New Testament language, he's in the believers' hearts of his children, and he lives all over the place within his people. But in Old Testament understanding of God, his presence is in Jerusalem. His presence is in the temple. So you pray towards the temple where God's presence is, that he might hear you and respond. So what Jonah's saying here is similar to what he's already said. I was in a mess, and I called out to you. I cried out to you. I screamed for you. And so he's saying here, he's giving you a better picture of it. I'm all alone in this water, waves crashing over me, turning me this way and that way. Like I'm abandoned by God. But I remembered that pray to God. Ask for help. Pray, maybe he'll help me. God, please help me, is what Jonah says. Verse 5. So verse 5 is where you see the point in which God shows up, pulls Jonah out, helps him, everything's better, save the day, it's all good, right? It's not what happens. But he just called out to God. He faced Jerusalem. He prayed to God in the middle of his mess. So God saves him, right? Here's the next line. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped about my head. At the root of the mountains, I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. It doesn't get better right away for Jonah. Jonah screamed to God for help. And there's still difficulty ahead for him. The difficulty here in the second section is harder than the difficulty in the first section. The first section, he's feeling abandoned, alone, treading water out there, being swished around. Here, his wording says that the waters have closed over me to take my life. The waters are coming to the point where I am drowning. I am about to lose my life, is what Jonah says. The deep surrounds me. The abyss surrounds me. The weeds were wrapped about my head. The idea here is like seaweed binding him. Think of that, right? You're trying to tread water. You're out there all alone. You feel abandoned. You're going this way and that way. You're choking on like your last form of breath, and now the seaweed's got you. And now it's wrapping you up, and you're entangled in the seaweed, and you can't get loose of the seaweed, and you're found like you're bound by the seaweed. Verse 6, it says, at the roots of the mountain, I went down to the land. That is a weird one, right? What is a root of a mountain? Does a mountain have roots? I'm a gardener. I know roots. Mountains don't have roots. What's he trying to say is, the land that we're above here, if you follow it down, especially near the water, like there's actually mountain underneath the water. Think of Hawaii. You see these beautiful islands? There's actually volcanoes below them, down into the water. The roots of the mountain, you might say. And he's saying, like, he's sinking down to the roots of the mountain. Like the idea of roots is this idea, too, of cuts and crevices. Like the cuts of the mountains, the crevices of the mountain. He's sinking down to the bottom of the ocean, is what he's saying. Wrapped in seaweed, tossed every different direction, things over his head. He's already prayed out to God for help, and now the seaweed's wrapped around him, and he's going down to the depths of the mountain. He went down to the land, which that's a weird one, right? Because like land is not in water. I don't know, Jonah doesn't know his science very well, right? The wording here of land is the idea of earth or the depths of the earth. So like, think of it in an ancient way. They're thinking about like the core or the center of the earth. That's the idea of like where the underworld or where Hades is, or this idea of like they didn't understand the earth like we do. But when he's saying I'm sinking down into the depths, into the roots of the mountain, into the land, he's saying I'm going to the center of the earth. I'm going, and he uses the next line where he says, and the bars closed up over me. The bars, the crossbars, or the bolts, this is the idea of the gates of death. That idea of the center of the earth, the gates of death, is what he's talking about. He's seeing himself dying, is what he's seeing. He's noticing that he is drowning, wrapped up in the seaweed, going further down, and he's about to die. It's that idea, right? Like, I mean, this is the part that grabbed me a bit as I was looking at this last week. That idea, we can all relate to like the struggles of life making you feel like you're just desperate and you need help. And we even understand the feeling of abandoned by God. And then we understand, even in that abandonment, to know that maybe we should still cry out or call out to God and ask for help. But then once we do that, we don't understand, why is there still more suffering after that? Why is there still more difficulty after that? And Jonah is saying, even after that moment, he gets to the point where he is kind of giving up here. His life is over, is essentially what he's saying. Until you see the second half of verse 6. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God, Yahweh my deity. Yet you showed up. You heard me, is what he said earlier. You heard me, and you answered me. And the wording here is that you brought up my life. Brought up is to ascend, to lead up, to lead out, to bring up, to cause to rise. Should be triggering something there too. Remember 3 days in the belly of the fish? 3 days, 3 nights? Who else spent 3 days, 3 nights in the center of the earth, the way he describes it? And what happened after he was in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights? He was called up. He was brought up to life from the pit. What Jonah is saying is, you saved me. You heard me, and you saved me. Guess what? The Jesus who's on the cross saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? He saved him. He brought up life in Jesus. I'm going to jump over there for a minute. This is how Jesus uses this understanding of Jonah towards himself. Matthew chapter 12. It says, and some of the scribes and the Pharisees answered him, saying, Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you. But he answered them, this evil and adulterous generation seeks a sign, but no sign will be given except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Story happening here. The religious leaders are saying, Jesus, show us yourself. If you really are God's chosen one, if you are who you say you are, then give us a sign. Anyone else ever done that before? Like, God will believe you if you do this. We've all done those weird things like the bartering with God from time to time. I was remembering when I was 17, I was 18 years old, going off to college in Wisconsin, and I had this horrible car, and it was breaking down a week before I go. And I remember having this debate with God, if you just fix it for me, I'll give you whatever. I'll stop doing the stupid thing I'm doing, or whatever. I'll fix it if you just fix it. All right. I mean, the car did get fixed, and I did find my way to Illinois. I mean, I broke down halfway, and whatever. But the reality was, I was just trying to play with God. I wanted what I wanted, and I'm trying to use him to get what I wanted. The idea here is do we believe? Are we just saying, God, I'll believe you if you just show me something. If you give me a sign. If you do a miracle for me, then I'll believe. What's Jesus' answer? Not doing one. Not going to get this evil and adulterous generation. You think you want a sign, but even if I show you a sign, you're not going to believe. He says, I'm not going to give you one, I'll give you one, except for the miracle of Jonah. And this is the miracle of all miracles, right? Because the miracle of Jonah is Jesus resurrecting from the dead. And it is the miracle of all miracles. And what he says here specifically, except the sign of Jonah, for just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And the men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment of this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. Bit of a pin here for next week, right? But the idea here is Jonah is going to go into Nineveh, and Jesus is saying your generation is far more evil than that generation, because all they did was hear the words of Jonah that they were an evil people and they repented. You get to see the sign of all signs. You get to see the Son of Man buried in the grave for 3 days and raised from the grave into newness of life. You get to see that, and you're still not going to believe. You want a sign? I'm going to give you the greatest sign there is. Jonah is pointing or foreshadowing to the greatest sign there is, that God is a Savior and a rescuer. That he is compassionate. That while he is just, he is compassionate, and he is going to offer his Son so that you can have salvation and rescue and life from everything. And we look at it and say, well, what about this scenario? Earlier, I presented one for my family. Am I praying for a miracle? I've been praying for a miracle for a long time on this one. Do I expect to have a miracle? I do expect to have a miracle. That someday my son will be healed. In this life or the next, someday my son will be healed, because I have a rescuing God. I have a God who saves. That doesn't mean I'm not going to go through what feels like certain death. And then I might be calling out to him, asking for him to save me now, and still going through what feels like certain death. But he is a rescuer. He is one who saves. And Jesus is the example that there is salvation for life after life, and there is new life in God. This whole story of Jonah is about, and Jesus went through everything we went through to get there. You've gone through it, Jesus has gone through it just the same. And there's rescue and life for him. And no matter what our circumstances are here, there is rescue and life for us. And it may just be after this life is over. Jonah gets to a point where he's saying, in that moment, you heard me. You answered me. You brought me up from life, from the pit. Yahweh, you are my deity, is what he says. Verse 7, he says, when my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. He's stating again what he stated in the beginning. This idea of, in my desperation, I called out to you, and you heard me, and you answered me. And then he says in verse 8, this is kind of a weird one. It kind of seems like it breaks from everything we've gone through so far. But like verse 8, those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will offer a sacrifice to you that I have vowed. What I have vowed, I will repay. It's almost like Jonah is kind of learning a lesson and kind of not learning a lesson. This is the struggle with Jonah. You'll realize, like, okay, after everything, Jonah should be totally on Team God, and we're all for it. You'll see at the very end of the book, he's not there. He's still going to struggle the whole time through, and there's a bit of a struggle here. He's kind of making this claim, and he's pulling it from Psalm 31, but he says, hey, those who pay regard to vain idols, they forsake the hope and steadfast love. Is that a true statement? That is a true statement, right? Those that don't worship Yahweh, the one true creator God, but instead worship other pagan gods or his creation, they don't have the hope of steadfast love. And I love that language of those two things. You might think, what is hope really? What are we hoping in? We're hoping in the steadfast love nature of God. He is a God of love, and his love is steadfast. That's where our hope resides. And so if we're not a people that worship other gods, we worship the one true Yahweh, who is a loving, gracious, forgiving God, we can trust and have hope in his steadfast love. That is a correct statement. The problem here is, he knows other people in his life, immediate life, that prayed to other pagan gods, but still received the steadfast love of God. Who was that? The sailors of last week. The sailors of last week were praying to other pagan gods, and they still experienced the steadfast love of God. And you'll also see that Jonah is setting himself up as like one that doesn't have any idols. And God was constantly using the prophets to talk to the nation of Israel about all of their idolatry. So he's setting himself as like he's not the one, but the reality is the pagan sailors, they receive the steadfast love of God, and Jonah receives the steadfast love of God. He's right in what he says, that I, with his voice, he will speak thanksgiving. So what he's saying is, you saved me, you are my God, Yahweh, you are my deity, and I thank you for saving me. That is a proper response to salvation. Like his people, understanding the immensity of what Jesus, how this points to Jesus and the cross and what he's done for us, we, his people who have received salvation, should be a grateful, thankful people who worship God. This is what happens here. He's grateful, he's thankful, and he worships. It says that he sacrifices, I will sacrifice to you, and I will have what I have vowed, I will pay. Those are the same words that the pagan sailors said in verse 16. The pagan sailors, after they threw Jonah over and the water stops, it says that they sacrificed to Yahweh and made vows to Yahweh. Jonah's just a little late to the game. This is the irony. Jonah's still kind of showing himself as the superior to the pagan sailors, superior to the Ninevites. When he's got idolatry just like the rest, when he is slower to the game of understanding the very nature and character of God, he's slower to his worship and sacrifice to God, but he ultimately gets to a point of thanksgiving, sacrifice, and worship of God. And then he says this line in the last part of verse 9, salvation belongs to the Lord. Deliverance, rescue, help, it belongs to God. It's a good thing what we know about God is that he is a merciful, compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Salvation belongs to him. It wouldn't do well in our hands. It wouldn't do well in Jonah's hands. In Jonah's hands, the Ninevites do not get the forgiveness and salvation of God. But in God's hands, the Ninevites get the salvation of God. Jonah gets the salvation of God. The sailors get the salvation of God. You and I get the salvation of God. Thank God it's in his hands and not in our hands. In our hands, we'd exclude a lot of people. In our hands, or someone else's hands, we'd probably be excluded. Salvation belongs to him. It's his. And he is merciful and gracious and slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. He loves the city of Seattle. He loves your neighbor. He is forgiving of those people. Yes, he is just, and he wants them to hear the evil and respond and come to him, and he will be ready to forgive them just like anyone else. Salvation belongs to him. It does not belong to you. It does not belong to us. It does not belong to the church. It belongs to God. It's in safe hands there. The story ends in verse 10. It says, "And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out on the dry land." I mean, anyone who's read a kid's book has heard this story, but it's just funny, isn't it? God speaks to the fish, which is a bit of irony even there, right? He spoke to Jonah, and Jonah didn't do what he was supposed to do. He speaks to a fish, and the fish follows what God says. Even a fish will follow what God says. Jonah and us, not so much. Sometimes we will, sometimes we won't. He speaks to the fish follows God's commands, and it vomits Jonah up on the ground. Is that a good thing? I mean, it's good he's rescued, but you're in fish vomit, sitting there on the side of the beach. The idea of vomit means sick or disgust. Is there still a bit of disgust? It's a bit of a question to think through as he's telling the story. Some of the verbiage makes you think, is God pleased with Jonah at this point? Is he not pleased with Jonah? Is Jonah a good guy? Is Jonah a bad guy? That's the tension you're going to keep wrestling with Jonah. The reality is, Jonah's not a good guy, Jonah's not a bad guy. Jonah's a guy, and God is God. God is compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. Its salvation belongs to him. And we've all, or will be at those points where in desperation we call out to God, and we want him to answer, we need him to answer, and it feels like he isn't answering. The ultimate end is there is salvation for God's people. I hope and wish, just like you, that there's salvation for our specific scenarios much sooner than that point, and we'll be praying for that with you, holding on to hope, trusting in a steadfast God who is a loving God, but ultimately there is salvation for all of us. And we as his people who have received salvation need to be a people of thanksgiving and a people of worship. May that be what guards, if anything's said of us, let's be a people who are grateful to God and a people that worship God. Not a people that are ready to judge the evil outside, because the evil outside is also the evil inside. We put salvation in the hands of God, and we're thankful to him, and we worship him, and we love the rest. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the lessons of Jonah's story here, specifically, Lord, in his prayer. Thank you, just the honesty and vulnerability and realness that we see in this story. Lord, I pray deeply for those in this church who are going through it right now, who have gone through it in the previous season, who've gone through it in seasons before. Lord, that in our desperation, help us to see you, to remember you, to call out to you, to trust you, to even if while we're doing that, it doesn't feel like there's an answer or a change in our scenario, help us to have hope in a steadfast God, a God who has steadfast love. Help us to hope in that God of steadfast love. And in the hope that we have in a God of steadfast love, Lord, help us to be as comfortable as we can be with the fact that salvation is in your hands and not in ours and not in anybody else's. So, Lord, I pray that you would rescue your people. Rescue me. Rescue us. Rescue Seattle. Rescue this world. Lord, save us. And may it be in your hands and not ours. Help us to be a people of worship and gratitude. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to give you an opportunity right now, Vine Church, to express that thanksgiving and gratitude and worship to God. You know where you're at and how this falls and what you need to hear or needed to hear through this. I hope that you hear a God who is a God that holds salvation himself, a God that is a God of steadfast love, a God that we can hope in that God of steadfast love, even if you're going through it, especially if you're going through it. So I want to give you an opportunity to pray out to that God. Take the time. You're not in the fish for 3 days to pray. You're just sitting in a comfortable church, but you can still pray out to God in the midst of what you're going through. And then we'll come and take communion, where we remember the fact that Jesus was in the belly of the fish for 3 days, belly of the earth for 3 days. And what we're seeing here is salvation. Salvation for Jesus himself. Jesus rose from the dead. And that same salvation that Jesus had, he offers to us as well. So come and remember salvation, pour out your hearts as God would have you pour out your hearts to him today, and then we'll sing and worship and celebrate God together.